The next morning, Kevin convinced himself that the scratches and bruises were coincidental, perhaps the result of restless sleep or catching himself on something during the night. He was a rational man, after all, and rational men don't develop unexplained injuries from dreams. But as he stood in his bathroom mirror examining the marks on his arms, he couldn't shake the feeling that they formed a pattern eerily similar to what he remembered from his nightmare. At his antique shop that day, Kevin decided to share his experience with his business partner and longtime friend, Marcus Richardson, a fellow dealer who specialized in estate jewelry and religious artifacts. Marcus had a background in religious studies and often helped Kevin identify items with spiritual or cultural significance. When Kevin described the contents of the box and showed him the photographs he had taken, Marcus's reaction was immediate and concerning. "Kevin, you need to understand what you're dealing with here," Marcus said, his usually jovial demeanor replaced by genuine worry. "These aren't just random religious artifacts. This granite slab, this inscription, it's a containment stone. In Jewish mysticism, these were used specifically to trap malevolent spirits. And this wine goblet, see these markings? These are binding symbols used in exorcism rituals." Marcus had spent considerable time studying Kabbalistic traditions during his graduate work in religious anthropology at Portland State University. He explained that what Kevin had purchased wasn't simply an antique wine box filled with family heirlooms, but what appeared to be a complete Dybbuk containment kit assembled by someone who clearly understood the serious nature of what they were dealing with. "The photograph you found," Marcus continued, examining Kevin's digital images on his laptop. "This woman looks terrified. Look at her eyes. That's not just sadness. That's genuine fear. And these Hebrew inscriptions on the back, they're not blessings or memorial texts. These are warnings." Over the next several days, Kevin made the decision to keep the box closed and stored it in his workshop's back room, away from customers and casual viewing. But the disturbing experiences were far from over. In fact, they were just beginning to escalate in both frequency and intensity. His employees at the antique shop began commenting on Kevin's appearance. Janet Morrison, his assistant manager who had worked with him for 6 years, mentioned that he looked exhausted and asked if he was feeling ill. His skin had taken on an unusual pallor, and dark circles had appeared under his eyes despite his attempts to get adequate sleep. More concerning still, Kevin had begun to develop what appeared to be premature hair loss, with entire patches of hair falling out seemingly overnight. The nightmares continued every single night, each one more vivid and terrifying than the last. They all followed a similar pattern. Kevin would find himself in various dark enclosed spaces, sometimes basements, sometimes caves, occasionally what appeared to be prison cells or concentration camp barracks. Always, there was the woman's voice speaking in Hebrew, growing increasingly agitated and demanding.
Always, there were the grasping hands and the overwhelming smells of jasmine, roses, and decay. But the supernatural occurrences weren't limited to Kevin's sleeping hours. During his waking life, he began to experience what he could only describe as paranormal phenomena throughout his home and workshop. Lights would flicker without any apparent electrical problems. Tools would move from where he had placed them, sometimes appearing in completely different rooms.
The temperature in his workshop would drop suddenly and dramatically, even on warm autumn days, and the strange jasmine scent would appear without warning, sometimes so strong that it was nauseating. Most disturbing of all were the sounds. Kevin began to hear what sounded like scratching coming from inside the wooden box, even though he had verified multiple times that it was securely latched and contained no living insects or animals. The scratching would occur at all hours, sometimes soft and tentative, sometimes frantic and desperate, as if something was trying to claw its way out from the inside. 2 weeks after acquiring the box, Kevin made a decision that would prove to be a critical mistake. Against his better judgment and despite Marcus's warnings, he decided to give the box to his mother, Ida Mannis, as what he thought would be an interesting Halloween gift. Ida was a 78-year-old retired teacher who lived alone in a small apartment in Portland's Hawthorne district. She had always been interested in antiques and had often helped Kevin evaluate potential purchases at estate sales. Kevin thought that perhaps the disturbing experiences he had been having were somehow psychological, brought on by stress or the power of suggestion after hearing Sarah's warnings about the box. He reasoned that if his mother, who was practical and level-headed, experienced nothing unusual, it would prove that the whole thing was simply in his imagination. This decision would haunt Kevin for the rest of his life. Ida was initially delighted with the gift, appreciating both the craftsmanship of the box and the mysterious nature of its contents. She placed it on her dining room table and spent several hours examining each item, particularly intrigued by the Hebrew inscriptions and the antique wine goblet. That evening, she called Kevin to thank him and mentioned how much she was looking forward to researching the historical significance of the pieces. But Ida's enthusiasm was short-lived. Within 24 hours of receiving the box, she began experiencing the same type of vivid nightmares that had plagued Kevin. However, her experiences were significantly more severe and frightening. Unlike Kevin's dreams of dark spaces and grasping hands, Ida's nightmares centered around a specific woman, the same woman whose photograph was contained in the box. In Ida's dreams, this woman would appear in her apartment, speaking rapidly in Hebrew and gesturing angrily toward the box. The woman appeared to be trying to communicate something urgent and desperate, but Ida, who didn't speak Hebrew, couldn't understand what she was trying to say. The woman's frustration would grow with each passing night, and she would become increasingly aggressive in her attempts to communicate, sometimes reaching out as if to grab Ida or shake her. On the third night after receiving the box, Ida experienced what she later described as the most terrifying event of her entire life. She woke up at approximately 2 in the morning to find the woman from the photograph standing at the foot of her bed, no longer confined to her dreams but somehow present in her physical reality. The figure was translucent, but clearly visible in the dim light filtering through her bedroom curtains. The woman was pointing toward the dining room where the box sat, and her mouth was moving as if she was speaking, but no sound was coming out. Her expression was one of desperate urgency mixed with rage, and her eyes, those same intense eyes from the photograph, seemed to bore directly into Ida's soul. The apparition remained visible for what Ida estimated to be nearly 5 minutes before gradually fading away, leaving behind only the overwhelming scent of jasmine and roses. The next morning, Ida called Kevin in a state of complete panic. Her voice was shaking so badly that Kevin initially had difficulty understanding what she was trying to tell him. When he finally grasped the severity of what his mother had experienced, he immediately drove to her apartment to retrieve the box, bringing Marcus along as a witness. What they found when they arrived was deeply disturbing. Ida's apartment, normally immaculate and carefully organized, was in complete disarray. Furniture had been moved from its usual positions, books had fallen from shelves, and several picture frames had somehow fallen off walls and tables. Most shocking of all, every clock in the apartment had stopped at exactly 2:17 in the morning, the precise time when Ida estimated the apparition had appeared. But the physical disturbances were nothing compared to what had happened to Ida herself. In just 3 days, this vibrant, healthy 78-year-old woman had aged what appeared to be several years. Her hair, which had been silver but full and healthy, had begun falling out in large patches. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and she had developed deep lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Most concerning of all, she had developed a persistent, hacking cough that seemed to come from deep in her chest, despite having no history of respiratory problems. Kevin immediately took the box back to his workshop, but the damage to his mother's health had already been done. Over the following weeks, Ida continued to experience health problems that her doctors couldn't explain or effectively treat. The hair loss continued, her cough worsened, and she developed what appeared to be chronic fatigue that left her barely able to perform routine daily activities. It was at this point that Kevin began to seriously consider the possibility that Sarah Glazer Cohen's warnings about the box might have been more than just superstitious fear.